Okay, we'll study this stuff a little bit more when we get into non-destructive testing. But permeability, that's what we're going to talk about. Now, goes right along with the two things we were just talking about. Permeability is the ability of a metal to become magnetized. Metal to become magnetized. So, soft iron has high permeability, which means
It
easily becomes magnetized, but it has low
Retentivity,
retentivity.
which is the ability to remain magnetized.
So you can easily line up the domains, but as soon as you remove the magnetizing force, they get all sloppy and lazy. Like, nah, never mind, we're done. And so then carbon steel, has low permeability, which means,
high retentivity.
yep,
Is that purely inverse kind of function, or is
the
there
reverse function, yep.
It's purely reverse. There's never like something that has high permeability and low and high retentivity.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Gotta be pretty rich.
And really, in the NDT world, just deal with these two things and the spectrum between them. So yeah, this at one end and that at the other, and then that's what you deal with.
So when you say it's hard to magnetize it, like our magneto rotors are technically hard to magnetize.
Oops, that's not the word I wanted. Yes, I'll explain as soon as I get this word out of my.
Low permeability, high retentivity.
Yeah, no, I mean I get that. I just was like, it wasn't really hard to magnetize.
So, in other words, if I were going to, I hate to apply it to non-destructive testing, but it's where it really comes into play. So, if you have soft iron, you can easily magnetize it, but as soon as you remove the magnetizing force, it's no longer magnetized. So you have to inspect it while the magnetizing force has been applied, or apply the medium while the magnetizing force is applied. So you have to do it simultaneous. We'll get into that. But carbon steel, you can magnetize it and then put the medium on it and then inspect it. So magnetize it, medium, inspect. It's called the residual method. But you cannot do that with soft iron. Once the magnetizing force is removed, you don't. All bets are off as to whether it is magnetized or not. But the thing is, you can magnetize soft iron with much lower currents. You've got to have a lot higher current to get carbon steel to do what you want it to do. But once you do it, there it is. So with your rotors, which are going to have very high retentivity, they're also going to have very low permeability, so it takes a lot of current to actually make it do what you want it to do. But once it's there, it sticks. Let me see. And last word I'm going to throw out here before we start talking about ignition systems is reluctance.
What happens when they get hot? If you get a magnet hot?
Depends on how hot. We will talk about that. It is the Curie temperature. If you get it to the Curie temperature, which is extremely, extremely hot, it loses all magnetism. Now, you having worked with metals, there are two types, well, there's four types of stainless steel I learned, but I always thought, I was told there were two when I went through school. There were two types. There's martensitic and austenitic. And one of them is magnetic and the other is not. The austenitic is non-magnetic, the martensitic is. However, if you get it red hot, the non-magnetic stainless, get it red hot, you can stick a magnet right on it, lift it up, and as soon as the red hot flashes, it'll fall off the magnet. Pretty weird, huh? Yeah, I can't explain that.
Is the non-magnetic stainless the one that's just slightly magnetic? You know how they're like
Yeah.
Is that what they mean by non-magnetic? Or is that the magnetic one?
No, the magnetic one is magnetic. So, hey, that's
Full on like.
yeah.
Okay.
All right. Reluctance.
Oh, that.
I was reluctant to come to work today. Actually, I wasn't. I like coming to work. That is the opposition of a material to magnetic lines of flux. I don't have any examples, but trying to think about it. I think wood would have a. No, wood wouldn't, because magnetic lines of flux go right through wood. I just proved that a minute ago. I was trying to think of some things. I think air has, well, definitely air has a certain amount of reluctance. It doesn't like it.
Water? A little bit? No, because you can put a magnet next to a stream of water and it will bend.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that might mean yes. It's resistant to the magnetic lines of flux.
Oh, like the water coming out of your faucet or something? You're saying you can like bend it with a magnet?
He said that. I didn't say that. I didn't know that.
Like you can take a straw and rub it on your clothes and hold it up to the faucet and it'll bend away from the straw.
These guys are making up crap. Don't listen to them.
GTS and Junior magnets.
No, I'm about to do this. Like,
All right, let's talk about some ignition systems. Now we got the magnetism out of the way, so we can go back. We can talk about our rotor with intelligence. Let's throw the rotor out and talk about something that doesn't have a rotor. So,
wait, before you go, can you tell me what that stainless is that's magnetic again? The name?
martensitic,
Martensitic?
and the other one was austenitic.
Who are those named after?
Martin Magnetic?
Martin and Austin.
The steel brother.
Maybe.
All right, Kettering system, Kettering ignition, also known as a battery ignition system. There we go, battery. I missed you. Well, it wasn't that long ago, a couple of years ago, where I'd say, well, there's no such thing as battery ignition systems in aircraft anymore. Maybe it's some sort of home built that's running some sort of Volkswagen engine or something. That I don't know.
Sounds like an icon.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, no, because these are Rotax. Rotax has an internal magneto, and they have a weird ignition system.
Isn't a Rotax like a 2-stroke or something like that?
They used to be, now they're a 4-stroke. I think I don't know if they make the 2-stroke anymore. Anyway, off the subject. But definitely what we're going to talk about is the older cars, not our new electronic ignition systems. But what I was going for is that it wasn't that long ago I said our systems don't use a battery, period, end of story, but now they do. So it has become, in the last few years, very common to take off one of your magnetos, the dual magnetos, in which there are two, not the dual magneto, the ones with dual magnetos, right? Not the dual magneto, but an airplane with dual magnetos.
Can we call it twin magnetos and dual magnetos?
Nope. So now it is very common to take one of these off, toss it, and put a battery style, solid state battery operated ignition system on it.
Isn't that a FADEC?
No, not, because FADEC is full authority digital control. It's not that, but to an extent. It does have some limits where it can advance and retard the timing, is where magnetos don't. You have to hook it up to a manifold system. There's even an STC, which I wasn't aware of till the other day when I was looking into it. You can take off both your magnetos, toss them both, and put on 2 battery-operated solid-state Surefly ignition systems. The thing is, though, once you go to the second one, you need a second independent battery to operate that one. You can't have one battery operating both, which makes sense, right?
That battery's only for that, nothing else.
That is correct. Well, maybe a cigar later. All right, so battery ignition system. This particular style used on older cars. cars. I have an older boat. I use it on my boat because it's not electronic ignition. What kind it is, but let me see. Principle of operation. Let's do it like this. Principle of operation. We'll come up here. We'll change pins. Let me see here. I don't screw it up. All right, so first thing we have with a battery ignition system is a battery. Okay, so power source, a battery. And from the battery, we're going to have an ignition switch.
A fuse. You don't have fuses? I guess
It's a car. Who cares? Fine. It's got one of these fuses. All right. From there, we're going to go into our coil. Now, we talk about coils. It's a coil assembly. We want to use the word coil assembly. Now, I'm not going to make you say that, but I want you to know coil assembly. And we say assembly because it contains multiple things. You write that down and talk amongst yourselves. I was busy on break. I forgot to do the rest of it.
So basically,
It's got multiple things.
that's
I
it.
know.
The second he said that.
Damn!
That's right. Session time is over.
I know.
One part of the coil, another part of the coil, and another part of the
All
coil.
right, I want to remind you that these coils are very expensive. The one from my airplane was almost $700. And these lines break. I mean, you guys are looking at it. Just the pure the energy of your vision is causing it to weaken. That's how weak they are. So be very, very careful with these. And then I have to buy new ones. But this is a coil assembly because it has multiple things inside. This is out of a Bendix magneto. Here's a cutaway of one. I don't know where the other half is. So I do know where the other half is. Where's the other half? Well, I don't know where the other third is. I don't know. So there's part of it. So all right. So this is a coil assembly. Don't look at it.
You already broke
Coil assembly. What does the coil assembly contain?
it. It contains
lot of things.
a soft iron core, a primary coil, and a secondary coil.
And an insulator.
Soft iron core. You can see the soft iron core coming out of it right there. I'll write this down later, but it's made up of laminated material, laminated soft iron, and it's laminated. We'll get into why it's laminated, but you can see it right there. It's metal, right? Piece there and a piece there. So soft iron core. What else does it have?
Primary winding.
A primary
Has
coil.
a primary winding. Or you could say the primary coil if you wanted to, and then that means it has a secondary.
What about the tertiary?
Not there.
Oh.
So that's the coil assembly. So back to our ignition switch right here. I have just drawn the primary, and this represents
Coil.
an iron core. And now in a coil assembly, we have the primary winding. Primary winding is made up of a small number of turns of rather large wire. You can see it on that thing passing around. You can find the larger wire. And the secondary is going to be made up of maybe 100 times more windings, fine windings on the secondary side. All right, and in a battery ignition then we got our coil assembly, which we can, I guess, kind of put it inside of a red thing here and say, well, there's our coil assembly. Coil assembly. We have over here the primary winding. And over here is the secondary winding. All right, and this line's going to come over here like that. This one's got to go. Well, now I kind of screwed myself there. We'll go this way. Let's get it down over here. We'll ground that out. There we go. Got a ground going there. So remember, we're going to talk about circuits. And it's kind of like some of you have forgotten that any sort of circuit, whether it be electrical circuit or a magnetic circuit, must have a path. And if you don't have a path, you don't have a circuit that's going to work. So we're going to look at that. All right, so we're going to come over here, and off this we'll go. Well, I'm going to have to go up because I'm out of room right there. What is that? Capacitor. Called a condenser in this particular instance. When it's used for ignition, that's what it's called. But
So some capacitors, they have just a single straight line, and then a curved line. You draw it with two straight lines.
I
Is
do.
there any difference? Okay.
I'll put an arrow.
Artistic liberty.
Yes, thank you.
Looks like one designates one that's has a polarity.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, it's an anode cathode one.
Okay.
Polarity.
Keeping that answer hidden from me.
All right, so that is our condenser, capacitor. These are the points, more appropriately called the breaker points. And that little square thing I wrote is my representation of a cam. All right, let's walk through what we have so far. So we've talked about AC and various types of reactions with coils and such. But without having gone through, okay, I'll quit bitching about that. So there's some information missing we got to fill in right now. So with a coil, and I'm just going to maybe back up a little bit and talk just about coils in general so that we have that nuance. When we have a coil and a core, this is called a transformer. And it doesn't have to have an iron core, but I made one with an iron core. It's called a transformer. And if we were to take this transformer and hook it up to a battery, when I connect, I'll make a switch, and when I connect the switch, what's going to happen right here to this primary winding, this is the primary winding, is it's going to suddenly build up. Well, let's back up. Current's going to flow through it. Because current is flowing through that primary, the current flowing through the winding will create
Electromagnetic field.
electromagnetic field. And that electromagnetic field is going to build up and cut across the secondary, which it's not really this way. In reality, you have the primary and the secondary is around it. And if you look at the one that's being passed around, they're not this way. They're this way.
Usually the power is going to the core itself, right? It goes like the core to the primary,
Yeah.
and then jumps.
Right. So in this one, we don't have the magnetism first. We simply have battery ignition, battery source, not ignition, but a battery that is going to build up in our primary. Current's going to flow, and we have a path. You can see the path. There's no resistance, but we know that when the current is flowing, that will create its own resistance through Lenz's law, and then that will build up a field, an electromagnetic field emanating from the primary. That field will cross across the secondary. Well, that is movement. The field built up. The electromagnetic field built up, and as it's building up, that is movement across the secondary, which will cause
Electricity to flow.
electricity to flow if we have a complete circuit. We'll make a little light bulb right there. So for a brief second, we're going to get the light come on. Then, well, it went away. How come it went away?
Because it's
Just
kind
not
of like DC.
constantly powered.
It is constantly powered.
you're
The,
talking about DC, then it's
It's
just.
not what we do now.
There's only one change of magnetic force.
It's DC. We only had one change. It built up. Now it's just there. It's not doing anything. So there's no relative movement. Remember, we have to have relative movement. So you have to have a magnetic field, relative movement, and a complete circuit for anything to happen. So for a brief second, we had movement. The field built up on the primary, cut across the secondary. The light, oh, no, it's dead. And then what happens when we open the switch?
There's gonna be more movement.
More movement, collapses. Not real fast. It's kind of, how fast does it go? 5 time constants. All right, so depending on the circuit. So it'll collapse and the light kind of came on for a brief second there and like, oh, well, that was fun. All right. But if we took this and we, let's see, this will probably screw everything up. No, it didn't. Yay. And we made a switch right here and I put a cam on here. It's operated by something. So every time it goes around, it takes those little points that I drew right there, right here, these points, and as this cam goes around, it makes the points go like this. What happens?
Constant
The
on.
light's gonna change.
That light's going to start working. Why? Because I'm constantly building up, contracting, building up, contracting. All right, so that's how it works. Well, a better way to do this would be to, what? AC, and then just close that and get rid of all this other stuff. And once the AC is running, then we're going to have this light bulb over here is going to work just fine. Why? Because, again, the magnetic field builds and cuts across the secondary, collapses across the secondary, builds. Every time it builds up, we have movement. Every time it collapses, we have movement. And that's how a transformer works.
Or you could just do it by hand. If you want the light to work, just turn
Yeah.
the switch on and off constantly.
Now, why would you do something like that? Well, because in a transformer, as I'm talking about, when you have, let's say, 10 turns over here, and you have 100 turns over there, you have a step up of 10 times. But you have to be careful, we'll talk more about this when we get around to this subject, is that you don't create electricity. The power stays the same, and I'm talking about voltage. So if I had 10 volts here, how many volts do I have over here?
100 volts.
Yeah, if I have 10 volts here, I'm going to have 100 volts over there. But
Amperage is gonna decrease.
if I had 10 amps over here, how many amps do I have over here?
100.
100 amps. Because that equals, what, 1,000 watts?
Yep.
1,000 watts, and this is also 1,000 watts. The watts stay the same. But the point I want to make right now is that this is why you do this, is so that you can take 10 volts and make it 100. Or in our case, we're going to take 200,
250 to 2,500.
yeah,
25,000.
and we're going to make it 20,000 over here.
Oh,
All right?
So it's a lot more efficient. It's like,
It's not efficient.
or like,
not efficient.
It's how we got 200 volts to be 20,000 volts.
So you could jump that up more if you just put more windings on the secondary coil. So you could
Yes, but there's more to it. But yes, the short answer is yes. We can just keep adding. We can make it 40,000. It doesn't. It doesn't really work that way once you start understanding the ignition system and when it fires and all that. You'll go, oh well, that makes sense. So do you understand why we do this?
yes.
Why we use a transformer? Because we've got to get, well, in this case, 12 volts. We've got to get 12 volts to somehow spark, and I haven't drawn the spark plugs yet, to give me 20,000. That's what we're after. How do we get 12 to be 20,000?
By having
Well, by having a coil assembly.
more
A
winding.
coil assembly is nothing more than a transformer. That's all it is. So we just call it a coil assembly. Just like we have over here a capacitor, we call a condenser. Yeah, we just change the names to confuse people. Yeah.
So it's the voltage that's creating the spark. It's not the amount of current it creates.
You got it. We don't need much current. Well, we need a couple electrons to bump over. We got to,
You got to bump them with a lot.
and if you ever worked on cars or motorcycles or whatever, you know that the point gap is only 0.18 or so. 0.16. All right, that's what it looks like, but that's not what electrically it is. That's its physical. But remember, air is an insulator. So if you ever played with cars, motorcycles, and such, you want lawnmowers, and you want to say, oh, maybe the spark plug's bad. You put the spark plug on the lead. Or you guys ever do this with any sort of automobile?
Just did that yesterday.
Okay, and what'd you do it on?
So you just take the plug out, and then you basically.
Was there a car? Or?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
car, and then you like ground it.
Yeah. So you want? Does this thing work? So yeah, he takes the plug out, plugs it in, and lays it down on something metal, so you have a complete. Don't hold it.
Make sure atomized gas is coming out.
Yeah, and so you lay it down, you crank it, and it's hard to see, right?
Yeah. Well, in my case, that's why I was testing because it doesn't work. I have no
Okay.
spark, but it should.
But it's kind of hard to see. And believe it or not, it's not putting out that much voltage. You don't want to touch it. It's going to hurt because it's going to be at least 1,000, I think, 2,000, maybe 5. But it's not much of a spark.
You can see it on gas stoves.
Okay, but why is it not much of a spark? Is because when it goes in the cylinder, air is an insulator, and the piston is compressing all that air. So you're actually packing air molecules around that. So electrically, that gap looks about 5 millimeters.
Oh wow! Oh, so the denser the air, the harder it is for the jump across.
That's why when we were testing magnetos, you guys see me test my magneto?
Yep.
I guess that would have been on Saturday. On the magneto tester, it's a 5 millimeter gap. Well, why 5 millimeter when the spark plug's only 18
That's the
point?
actual.
Because you're
That's-
in the cylinder.
Because in the cylinder, it acts like it's that kind of a gap, 5 to 7 millimeter or
Is that
something.
vacuum then in that gap or
What's that?
I think it's the 5 millimeters in open air.
Open air.
open it?
Yeah. All right. So we got to get that up to 12,000. That's how we do it. So 12 goes through here. Got 12 volts running to the primary. That creates a magnetic field that comes across.
Oh, sorry. I just had some idea.
Comes across. That magnetic field, well, it's actually, it's like this, goes across the secondary. So when it builds up, we could get,
20,000 volts.
okay, or when it collapses, transform works, but watch what this does. So we have a cam over here. Remember the cam I drew earlier? Okay, here's our cam. So what's going to happen, we close the switch, it energizes the primary, comes over here, and as long as the points are closed, current flows. What's my path?
Back to ground.
See. Let's turn on our ignition switch. Ignition switch on. So path of current. Through here, through here, through here. Energizes. Magnetic lines of flux build up and cut across the secondary. We use the word cut across. It means it's interacting with the secondary. Cut across it. So it did that, and for a brief second there, we could have got a little something, but we really don't. So it comes across over here. We have a capacitor we'll talk about. Points. So there is the path of return. Follow? So we can see a complete and total circuit as long as the points are closed.
Would that capacitor, so would it work if it's just grounded, or would you also want to have that ground wire actually connected? to
No,
the-
you want it just like this.
Okay.
That's why I drew it that way. All right, let's finish drawing this actually. So we've got the secondary right here. That's going to go towards the middle of our distributor, or distributor, if you want to call it that. Now I'm having a hard time not saying it. And this goes to our spark plugs. And the spark plugs go back to ground. That's 4-cylinder. It'll take me too long. I should have been a Geometro. I saved a little bit of time there. If you're not familiar, Geometro had 3 cylinders. All right, so we've got this going on here. We've got to get how many volts up here? We're going to say about 20. Yeah, about 20. It depends. All right, so current going through here, around here, through the points, back and around. At the appropriate time, the cam, which in a car is timed to the cam shaft. We'll get more into that into another class about why and how that works, but it's the pistons go, it goes compression, do this right, sorry, start here. Ignition, sucks in fuel air. Did I say ignition? Intake. Gosh, I'm going to get it right eventually. I'm going to try all of them. Start at the beginning. Piston comes down with the intake stroke, brings in fuel and air, comes up, compresses it, and right as it's coming up to compress it, before it gets to the top, bam, this thing's got a fire before it gets to the top. But I'll just do it timing. If you waited till here, it just doesn't work well. So it's compressing, ignition happens, and the piston continues to go up. By then, the fuel is burning, expanding, and it pushes the piston down. That's the power stroke. Then the piston comes up, pushes out all the nasty stuff, starts its trip down again. Up, now we go back to intake. So this thing has to fire. So the piston's going to go make 4 trips, 4 strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. So intake, compression, power, exhaust. So taking 4 strokes, but it only fires every other stroke, right? So, but the camshaft, which is operating the valves, is going around at half the speed it knows what to do. So, like I said, another class. So anyway, this camshaft is going to open the points at the point where it's supposed to fire. And what that does is it is going to rapidly collapse the primary. And the reason why it rapidly collapses is because of the capacitor. The capacitor aids in that. You get rid of the capacitor, this really doesn't work very well. Because what happens is, as the electrons are flowing through here through these points, as the points start to open, we have some 200 volts trying to jump that little gap. And it will. And so what happens is the points start to open and it just arcs across and arcs across until it can't anymore. And then by then, the points are open and where you wanted it to fire hasn't happened yet. It gets sloppy. So as the electrons are flowing up through here, the minute the points start to open, they start to release. That causes a lot more resistance right there. So now we have a high resistance connection because it's not being pressed together very well. And so all the electrons, well, they would like to take a much easier path, and this is an easy path. It sees it as pretty much a direct, I want to say short or open, because
It's been discharged.
It's been discharged,
So now it's like really
it's,
willing to expand.
yeah, it's a short. So it's short because at this moment it just sees it as a great place to go. So it's going to turn around and they all start filling up here. Well, by the time this is completely full, this is opened up so far that the electrons can no longer jump it. So it happens instantaneously. So that instantaneous opening of these points causes a sudden and rapid collapse, because movement, speed of movement, is a function of how much you get. So if it just kind of collapsed, we're not going to get much of a rise. Our coil isn't going to work as well. But if we could snap it like that, oh man, that fast-acting collapse of the field will really energize the secondary, which causes that 20,000 volts, which is going to come through here, over to here. Yes?
Does the capacitor kind of, for lack of a better term, bypass the time constants?
No, it's still...
Okay, 'cause you say it's very rapid, I would assume maybe... That
Well, time constant, how long it takes to charge. You don't need it to necessarily charge. You just need the points to open up and not arc.
Okay.
So as long as the capacitor is doing that job, then it's not like we need it to fill up. We just need to trick the points.
Understood.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of trying to control the spike of energy that's coming in.
No, it's giving the electrons a secondary path to go that they like better than the points that are starting to open.
It's tricking the electrons to go to a place where they won't arc.
Exactly. So now it keeps the points from arcing and causes a sudden and rapid collapse of the primary, which now we've induced a voltage in the secondary, and it has to go somewhere because we got a lot of voltage. So it's going to come through here, go to a finger that is going to point at the right cylinder, the one that we want to fire, jump a little gap right there, which is fine because there's 20,000 volts, jump across the spark plug gap, back to ground, and there's the circuit right there, because you got to have a complete circuit. And you can see it through any one of these spark plugs. There is the complete circuit, right? Okay, so about this 20,000 volts. you're only going to build up as much voltage as you need to make the current flow. So if this gap is basically non-existent, if we didn't have a gap right here, and none of this was a gap, it wouldn't build up to be all that much. It would just dissipate itself through the ground, to the
The
loop.
spark plug gap you're talking about?
Yeah, or any gap in there.
Or the distributor?
And now if you take that gap and start the spark plug gap and start moving it out, the voltage will build up until it can flow. And so the bigger the gap, the more voltage it's going to build up. So that's why it wouldn't do you any good to have a coil assembly that can make 40,000 volts if it only takes 20 to jump the gap. It'll never get to 40. It'll always jump at 20, and then you'll be done. Then it dissipates and goes back to ground. Follow?
Yeah. Do they make so those coil assemblies? Do they make them in all different like step ups basically, like different sizes, or is it kind of a standard? Or?
Well, I work on airplanes. You just buy the right part number, and that's
Well, so
you don't get to like.
Whoever was talking about the like hotter coils for trucks or muscle cars, you're probably supposed to change your spark gap.
Well, if you didn't, you'd be
Yeah,
wasting your money.
Yeah, you're not doing anything. So.
All right, so this is that's it. That's the battery ignition system. I have nothing else to add. I mean, that is the thing in its entirety, pretty much.
It's so simple.
It really is very simple if you get this. Now, if you don't get this, like, I have no idea. I hope it comes to me when you start talking about magnetos. It won't. Now is the time to say, I didn't get that, because we're going to start adding complexity to this to get to a magneto. Not a lot more, but this is more or less how a magneto works. We're just going to take off this left half and replace it with its own generator. That's about it.
So basically, for the cam that's opening and closing the point, so that the only purpose of that is to just give that rapid breakdown.
Well, you have to fire it at the exact right time.
Okay.
Because the piston is going to be at the right time.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure that that's timing the engine, or in our case, you have to time the magneto to fire at an exact spot. That exact spot has to be where the piston is. We'll get more into that later.
If that coil's too big, does it diminish the potential voltage to the secondary coil? Excuse me, not the coil, the condenser. If the condenser's too big. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it, which might be wrong. Is like it's a vat. It's like, okay, well, if it's if a ton more electron can continue to flow into there, like, does it need to like fill up at a?
I don't think it needs to
point?
fill up. No.
So you could.
I've never engineered one, so
I mean, like theoretically,
I know,
like
theoretically.
you could put a really, really, really big.
I know if it's too small, it'll
then-
fill up too fast, then you'll arc.
Right, but if it's too big.
But if it's too big, I don't have the answer for what if it's too
Think of
big.
it as a trap. It's like you don't need a small trap. You don't need only a small trap for a small.
No, that's
I'm
not.
just wondering
That's
if
not
there's
really
like
it.
if there's like a very.
I
specific
feel like, and I could be wrong on this, that if it's bigger than it needs to be, it would be okay because it would still function.
That's kind of what I'm wondering.
But if it's too small, it won't.
They probably build them,
But
probably a little bit larger than needed. But if it's too big, then it might have too much of a resistance of it might be wrong or something of that sort.
I don't want to say that for sure. So let me see.
What was what's hot spark?
Oh boy. I mean, I explained it. Now I feel like I got to write a whole bunch of stuff too. You want me to write all this stuff? You guys are like, yes, please. All right, the Kettering ignition system. Look, I changed pens. I'm awesome. Principle of operation. Let's see. Battery supplies 12 volts. The battery. Supplies 12 volts to a primary coil. In that system, if the ignition switch is open, is it on or off?
On.
In the Kettering I just drew.
Oh.
If it's open, it is off. And that is the difference between that and a magneto. Well, other differences, but that's a big difference.
Only difference.
Points,
They don't have any batteries.
open and close. Points via a cam. driven off the camshaft. And the reason why is because, and this applies to aircraft too, the camshaft turns at 1/2 engine RPM. And is directly linked to what is happening in the cylinders. I like to say that the crankshaft, which is another class, is the muscle, but the camshaft is the brains. Because the crankshaft is going round and round, making pistons go up and down. I don't know what's happening. I just make pistons go up and down, man. And it's the camshaft that's saying, all right, it's time to open the intake valve, time to close it, time to open exhaust, time to close it. Spark, come on. Need some spark. And so it knows what's happening. So camshaft is linked to what's happening in the cylinders, as where crank does not. As where crankshaft does not. It's kind of stupid. All right, when the point's open, point's open. What happens when the point's open?
The primary coil breaks down.
Okay.
Or well, collapses. The magnetic
Collapses is the word I want. The primary field collapses. Primary field collapses quickly. We'll add that word. Right, so primary field collapses. What does this do now?
This causes it to go across the secondary coil.
All right. I feel like I really kind of went, I should add a whole bunch of stuff. It just seems like it was too simple. It's like a jump. Let me see.
It caused a
Yeah, I feel like too much happened there. So, well, the battery, as long as you understand the battery or the primary had current going through it, that current caused a field, that field cut across the second. When the point's open, the primary field collapses quickly, which, and then we can add, we don't have to go back too far. So the rapid collapse. Nope. Not even gonna help me. The rapid collapse of the primary induces, I think I have a number here, induces, we'll say 12,000 to 40,000 volts in the secondary.
And this is under Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction. Kind of.
Sure. I'm trying to write this. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not pulling Faraday's law into this, I don't think. I'm just like, there you go. But yeah, I know some of you are like, yeah, the book talks about Faraday's law of induction. All right, primary 12th out. All right, understand that this is a very condensed version of what's happening. So if you were taking an oral and you just went through these points, I'd be like, yeah, okay, you're missing a whole lot of stuff. So let's make sure we get all that. So, all right, it is time to leave.